definition of it would probably have to include like actively like engaging with somebody and like trying to evoke things in them, like
exactly,
like, take them in a particular direction that you're choosing and not them.
Exactly, and that's actually the key elements of it, and that's not what we do. And in terms of trip sitting,
I don't want to say babysitting, but preventing someone from themselves, as far as like, I'm just thinking of DMT, like you kind of tend to block out so quickly, taking kind of their hand, making sure they're comfortable and safe and so on.
Right. So the difference between trip sitting and guiding would be that maybe you are not actually leading the experience, but you certainly made a commitment to sit through an experience with someone and to help them in some of the circumstances you mentioned. We don't do either of those. And the reason is, you know, when you're working at the party, especially on Saturday night, you might have 200 people through that night. If you're with someone, you might have to leave them and go do something else. So we don't actually want to get into any kind of arrangement that looks like a commitment to an individual and then suddenly have to not fulfill that commitment. So really what we do is we facilitate. We support and we facilitate. Stay calm. Most important thing. You don't be like, oh my God, so-and-so's freaking out. Because that's not going to be received very positively by them or be terribly helpful. Most important thing is, you know, assess the situation. There are situations we can't handle. If somebody is not breathing, if somebody is really seriously unconscious, call 911. We're lucky we live in Canada. You're not going to be arrested if an ambulance comes and it turns out the reason you're down is because you've been using drugs. In the States, it's a very different situation, but that's not what we have here.
We have that situation in Ottawa a lot. We have that situation in Ottawa quite a bit. If you call an overdose in, or if you call, so the cops always show up, I think. But that's just my experience.
Yeah, certainly in Vancouver, cops will attend an overdose, but typically you're not going to be arrested for the fact that you did something illegal as well. Obviously, get some basic information. Get the person's first name. So the key thing here is you don't want to do 20 questions. If somebody's struggling, the last thing they want is an interrogation. But it's really handy to know somebody's first name. Because if there's one thing in the world we're going to respond to, if there's one last little drop of our consciousness operating, it'll respond to our name. And it can really personalize the interaction. And so somebody's name is a very important thing to get. It helps to know what drugs they're on. People often are not good reporters. So sometimes you need to check with who they're with. But even they're not good reporters because people don't count alcohol as a drug. They don't count cannabis as a drug. So sometimes you have to ask. And it's handy to know how long ago did they take it, mostly just so that you can assess where am I on this person's trajectory. Am I looking at 3 hours of babysitting, or am I looking at just maybe an hour? If this person's struggling now, are they just coming up? Is it going to get a whole lot worse before it starts to stabilize? So it helps you when you're interacting with a person to give them a sense of where they are in their experience. Obviously, you want to check vitals. So we check skin temperature, sort of pupil size. We ask people, you thirsty, are you hungry? Because often they're high and they've had this horrible thing in their stomach and they think they're cramping, and then you say, well, are you hungry? Oh, I don't know. When did you last eat? I had a candy bar yesterday for breakfast. It's like, well, maybe some cookies and some tea would be a good idea right now. So we kind of are sort of party moms, and I've got a handout I'm going to give you at the end. And the very last page of it is called Party Mom's Guide to Party Smart Basics, which we put on the Shambhala website. We really want to keep a person conscious. It's absolutely critical. If a person goes unconscious, we are not medical professionals and we're out of our depth. If a person is unconscious, the situation is different. So it's really handy to learn some pain techniques, especially if you have friends who do GHB. You want to find out, experiment on yourself or on each other, find out all the places that hurt like hell. This hurts like hell. This hurts like hell. If somebody's starting to slip, you have to be willing to administer pain. It can be very challenging. But you really want to keep them conscious, particularly with GHB. And if you can't, then you might go back to thinking about calling 911. And if a person is unconscious and you really can't call 911, then it's good to learn the recovery position. I'm not going to demonstrate it now, we don't have time. But there's a position you can put someone in where they're unlikely to choke on their own vomit if they throw up. And it's actually a very handy thing to know. And also we do a lot of saying to people, just breathe. This breathe, relax, let go, I think comes from the 60s. And it's still very valid today. As I mentioned, GHB is a little different. So the problem with GHB is the risk is limitless. And I'm sure many of us have lost friends. There was a woman I worked with. When I was working for the Center for Addictions Research in BC. She was a very, very experienced drug user. She grabbed a water bottle and took a swig and it was G. She thought she was fine. Eventually some friends took her home. They stayed with her. 6 hours after she got home, her friend went out to have a smoke, and when he came back in, she was blue. So if you know GHB is involved, 99 times out of 100, the person's going to wake up feeling fabulous and be like, oh, you know, what's going on? Let's go party. But maybe not. And so I just say that everything I'm telling you, when it comes to GHB, you just have to be 100 times more cautious, because there's no sort of limit to how far down it can go. The other thing which is kind of unpleasant in these situations is we need to deal with sexual assault sometimes and with suicide. And so the real problem is that when you're high, according to the law, you can't consent. And so at a party, if you think about it, the majority of the sexual activity that's going on would not be legally considered consensual activity. And so it can be very, very difficult. So somebody might come and use language around sexual assault, or they may use some language around sexual activity that maybe they had some regrets or resistance to, and it's really complicated. You don't have to decide whether a sexual assault took place or not. But if you get the faintest hint, then all of a sudden a whole lot of different rules apply. And you really need to know these rules, and actually make it hard to support someone. So the most important thing is you must not interfere. If you ask somebody what happened, tell me what happened, because you're curious and you want to establish, is this weird story that kind of feels like something may have gone on, I want to find out more. If that person does eventually go to court, what you did could be considered to be interfering with a witness. It could be considered to be putting a story in somebody's head. So when somebody says that, you can check in with them. You know, am I hearing you right? Are you suggesting that something sexual happened that you didn't want to have happen? And if they say yes, you have to stop there. So you can support them through the process that follows, but you can't discuss what happened. Only because by doing so, you really reduce their chance of getting justice later if it goes to the point of pressing charges. So every hospital emergency department has a sexual assault kit. It's really important to get somebody to a hospital so that they can be checked. And this is also hard. No food, no water, no going to the bathroom. Any of those things could likely cause the person to eliminate, and that's going to make it much harder to collect a good sexual assault kit. So sometimes it can be really hard, but you really need to try and encourage the person, if they are going to drink, just some sips, not enough to make them go to the bathroom, because you really want the sexual assault kit to get good specimens. It's important to think about drug-facilitated sexual assault if you're putting on a party, and to think about how you would recognize it, how you might recognize it. Are there any places in your party or in your party venue where it could happen? Are there any dark corners, or if you're out in the bush somewhere? So it's just good if you're a party organizer to have this in your consciousness, or if you're going out with friends to have this in your consciousness. Check in with your friends, particularly ones who like to do drugs like ketamine or GHB where they might become unconscious. In terms of suicide, this is a sort of an awkward one. I would just say that none of us are, or generally we're not professionals, mental health professionals, to take suicide talk seriously. If you hear someone talking about suicidal thoughts, take it seriously. The worst that will happen is some people might get embarrassed, so there might be a bit of unnecessary drama. But the error on the opposite side is too hard to contemplate. And so some things to think about is if you are going to put on a party, you are going to do some kind of safe space, you need to think about who's responsible for handling a sexual assault situation? Who's responsible for handling a suicide situation? You need to have a protocol. Usually it's the security people because they're trained. But everyone who works needs to know, who do I go to if this happens? What's the procedure? And if something like this does happen, remember that there's the person who had the problem, and then there's the person who helped them. The person who helped them is going to have very strong reactions to what they've experienced. So you really need to debrief the volunteer and support the volunteers as well. As volunteers, we're not impermeable. So it's very much about taking care of your own people as well, and really thinking through how you're going to support them if one of these situations comes up. So we talk a lot about this model of, no such thing as a bad trip.